Ở bên đây thì cái mic nó có ngại không biết chi. Dạ. Có nhưng mà này có vẻ bình thường mà. Ok, nó là lên là số. Fuck. Hãy tắt đi. Tắt rồi. Sao cái trái có vẻ là không. Số còn 3. Ok, 31 bao luôn nè. Yeah. Tết. Alright. I return none copyright music on stream. Yeah. Blender.
Since I made my last video about topology tips in Blender, I've had a bunch of requests to make some sort of follow-up, and I did promise a few months back that this would be a series. So luckily I have quite a lot of these tips up my sleeve, so let's take a look at some of the methods professionals use to handle their topology when 3D modeling. So at the end of my last topology video, I showed off a method to create a cylinder that has all quads and no n-gons on the cap. A lot of people said they found that really useful, and there's actually a few methods of doing this with various strengths and weaknesses, so I thought I would show off a few of the methods that I commonly use. So the first method is essentially the same as the one I demoed in the last video. You just delete the top of a cylinder, and then you select the top edge loop, you press E to extrude and S to scale it in a little bit, and then if you press Ctrl F with the inner ring selected, you can perform a grid fill operation. You can straighten this out a little bit if it's wonky by playing with the offset number, and I tend to find that you get slightly better distribution of faces if you enable simple blending. In object mode, if I press Ctrl and a number like 4, that'll add a subdivision surface modifier, and I can add some support loops, and as you can see, we get some nice shading and good quad topology. We can also easily change how sharp the edge of the cylinder is just by grabbing these edge loops and double tapping G, and then sliding them closer or further away from the edge. The next method requires you to have a cylinder that has a triangle fan. There is an option for that when you make the cylinder, or if you've already got the cylinder in the scene, you can select the top, inset a little bit, press M and collapse, and you get a triangle fan. So if we select the top and we inset again, then we just need to go around and manually select every other one of these edges that make up the triangles. Unfortunately, check a deselect and things like that won't work here, so you do have to do it manually, but it doesn't take very long. Once you've got that done, you can press Ctrl and Delete, which will dissolve those edges, and now the triangles are actually all quads. So we can add in a support loop to this, because if you look, if we add the subdivision surface, you can see it goes a bit wobbly, but if we add support loops in, we get a nice smooth top on the cylinder. So for this final method, we're just going to need a plain cylinder. I'm going to go into top view with number pad 7. I'm going to select the top and bottommost vert, and I'm going to press J to join them. Then I'm going to do that one vertex either side. I'm going to do 11 horizontal cuts. So I'm starting with the middle row, then I'm doing 5 above, and then I'm going to go down and select the ones underneath. I'm going to do the 5 below. If you don't connect the last one together, then what you'll notice is that that face is actually a quad with 4 sides on the edges. So now, like before, we can just add in a supporting loop. We can select all of the faces on the top and do an inset with the I key to add a supporting loop around the top as well. and if we add a subdivision surface modifier, we get another nice smooth result. Now, I don't use this one very often, but it can be handy when you need to transition from a cylinder to a square shape, or if you're using the subdivision surface modifier like this, you can make these nice inset shapes, which sometimes comes in handy. Okay, so this mesh has edge loops that go horizontal and it has vertical ones, but what if we wanted to change the direction of a loop so it goes something like this around the corner? Well, that's actually quite easy to do. All we need to do is select the two edges that we want to become our redirection point, press M and collapse. In theory, we have just done exactly what we set out to achieve. We've redirected a loop to go around the corner. You can see that we still have edge loops that go horizontal and we have vertical ones, but we now have an edge loop which turns the corner. However, this looks really bad and it's messy topology. So I'm just going to use the snapping tools to align this with the other verts around it, move it into a bit of a better position. You can see that we've created two triangles here as well. All I'm going to do here is just select these two edge loops and press Ctrl and Delete and just dissolve them entirely. Now we have the really nice clean topology that we were looking for, and we still have that redirected edge loop with one going horizontal, one vertical, and one around the corner. If we apply a subdivision surface modifier to this, you can see that we get some pretty decent looking topology, and it's a nice smooth curve. The next thing I want to talk about is dealing with poles. A pole is a vertex connected to multiple edges. There's two types of poles to be concerned about in 3D modeling. There's N poles, which have 3 edges, and E poles, which are connected to 5 edges. Poles with 6 or more connecting edges are usually considered bad topology and should just be avoided entirely where possible. E poles, the ones which have 5 edges, are most commonly created when you extrude a face out, and N poles, the ones with 3 edges, are most often found on sharp corners. Now, poles aren't necessarily bad, and often they're actually unavoidable. However, you do need to manage them properly to make sure that they don't cause shading issues and other mesh artifacts. Generally speaking, you should avoid placing either type of pole on a curve with a steep gradient. Try to move the pole away to a flatter area of the mesh instead. For example, here is a mesh with an E pole right on the corner, and you can see once we apply the subdivision surface modifier, it causes this weird pinching effect. Now here's the same mesh, only I've moved the pole so that it's further back from the curve and now on a flat surface, which completely eliminates all the problems. Before we move on, I want to take a minute to talk about the sponsors of this video, Asus and Intel. They've sent me this. It's a Asus ProArt StudioBook 16 OLED laptop, and this thing is a real beast for creative work. It comes with a powerful Intel Core i9-13980HX processor, an RTX 4070 graphics card, 8 TB of storage, and 64GB of RAM. It's powered by a 13th gen Intel Core i9 processor, and the 16-inch Asus Lumina OLED display looks absolutely gorgeous. It's 3.2K resolution, touch compatible, and the laptop comes with a stylus in the box, which is really handy for 3D work. So this mesh has edge loops that go horizontal and it has vertical ones, but what if we wanted to change the direction of a loop so it goes something like this around the corner? Well, that's actually quite easy to do. All we need to do is select the two edges that we want to become our redirection point, press M and collapse. In theory, we have just done exactly what we set out to achieve. We've redirected a loop to go around the corner. You can see that we still have edge loops that go horizontal and we have vertical ones, but we now have an edge loop which turns the corner. However, this looks really bad and it's messy topology. So I'm just going to use the snapping tools to align this with the other verts around it, move it into a bit of a better position. You can see that we've created two triangles here as well. All I'm going to do here is just select these two edge loops and press Ctrl and Delete and just dissolve them entirely. Now we have the really nice clean topology that we were looking for, and we still have that redirected edge loop with one going horizontal, one vertical, and one around the corner. If we apply a subdivision surface modifier to this, you can see that we get some pretty decent looking topology, and it's a nice smooth curve. The next thing I want to talk about is dealing with poles. A pole is a vertex connected to multiple edges. There's two types of poles to be concerned about in 3D modeling. There's N poles, which have 3 edges, and E poles, which are connected to 5 edges. Poles with 6 or more connecting edges are usually considered bad topology and should just be avoided entirely where possible. E poles, the ones which have 5 edges, are most commonly created when you extrude a face out, and N poles, the ones with 3 edges, are most often found on sharp corners. Now, poles aren't necessarily bad, and often they're actually unavoidable. However, you do need to manage them properly to make sure that they don't cause shading issues and other mesh artifacts. Generally speaking, you should avoid placing either type of pole on a curve with a steep gradient. Try to move the pole away to a flatter area of the mesh instead. For example, here is a mesh with an E pole right on the corner, and you can see once we apply the subdivision surface modifier, it causes this weird pinching effect. Now here's the same mesh, only I've moved the pole so that it's further back from the curve and now on a flat surface, which completely eliminates all the problems. Before we move on, I want to take a minute to talk about the sponsors of this video, Asus and Intel. They've sent me this. It's a Asus ProArt StudioBook 16 worth more than $100,000. Top animated, and you also want to avoid any weird shading artifacts. Over the and joining them together. You'll notice where the loops do join, it creates E poles.
Ever looked at that next level 3D model on sites like ArtStation and thought, I want to create that? You're not alone. Many of us get into 3D modeling fueled by the inspiration from those polished 3D models by professional artists, only to find ourselves facing one formidable technical foe: topology. Topology can be the unsung hero of flawless 3D models, but a nightmare to many 3D artists. Get it wrong and you're trapped in the wireframe weeds, constantly battling mesh issues and shading errors, wondering why your 3D models just don't look right. What's going on, you 3D modeling beasts? This is JL Musi, and today we're gonna dive into the top topology mistakes you're probably making with your 3D models. A couple of weeks ago, I asked my 3D Beast Academy students to send me the 3D models with the topology issues they were struggling with the most. After combing through hundreds of 3D models, n-gons, and shading errors, I pinpointed those most common yet critical mistakes that could be sabotaging your 3D modeling. Many of these costly topology mistakes you're probably making right now without even realizing it. But don't worry, I got your back. By the end of this video, not only will you be able to spot these errors in your own work, but you also know exactly how to fix them, elevating your 3D models to professional standards. Before we get started, don't forget to grab your copy of the Hard Surface Cheat Sheets. It's your handy companion designed to quickly boost your topology knowledge. Click the YouTube card right here to get your free guide. So without further ado, let's dive right into the top 3D modeling topology mistakes that could be killing your growth. Mistake number 1 is no holding edges, or the improper amount of holding edges to hold your shapes. Before we begin, I want to get a couple things out of the way. I am going to be using Maya and also jumping in into a Blender file as well. Most of these techniques will work in pretty much any 3D modeling package that does support subdivision modeling. For these models submitted, I'm going to be focusing on a small part of the model, and it's also going to be the part that I think could benefit the model the most, as well as bring you guys the most value. So this first set of models that we're looking at is by Rob. He did an amazing job with these. Something that you will notice, I'm just going to frame on this. I'm going to go to 3 mode. This is the equivalent of using a subsurf modifier in Blender. 3 mode is just the equivalent of that in Maya, and I'm going to be toggling back and forth. One thing you'll notice with his subdivision surfaces is that they don't have holding edges. However, they are actually keeping the hard edges. That's because he is using creasing. Creasing is just a little bit of a different way to reinforce those edges, and both of these methods have pros and cons. Rob did an amazing job modeling these characters. One of the mistakes that Rob did is that he didn't properly reinforce these edges right here on this shape. So if we zoom in here and we go into 3 mode, this is just subdivision mode, we'll notice that this is collapsing on itself. So for inside corners, you're going to need 3 edges here to properly reinforce this shape. To have the proper amount of those holding edges, we are running pretty light on this perimeter here. So Rob had 12 subdivisions on this initial cylinder, and for a simple shape, if this was just a simple cap, that would work. But remember, when hard surface modeling, especially for sub D mode on curved surfaces, details dictate density. That's something that I'm going to be repeating quite a bit throughout this video, but that means that the more details you have, especially when planning out a cylindrical shape, is the denser you might want to go. So here, I basically just doubled that amount on that initial cylinder, and I was able to manage to keep the same exact shape. I actually extracted this shape and just remodeled it, but I went with double the divisions, and then here you'll know that I have the proper creasing here, which I have pretty much 3 edges coming in here. And now if we go to subdivision mode, we disable the wireframe, you'll see that we're getting a much better result. And here's a bonus tip for Rob or anybody that's creating hard surface models. You always want to think about symmetry. So Rob didn't have a symmetry line here. So if he has to go back and remodel anything, he's gonna have to do double the work. And here you see that I'm very adamant about always having a clear, distinctive symmetry line, at least one down the middle. That way I can work with symmetry, leveraging my speed, and also the preciseness of my topology. Ultimately, you want to look at how far the asset is going to be from the camera, and these are pretty big details that even a pinching at this level is still noticeable. So this looks like it's a film asset, and this is going to be incredibly important to really nail down the visual fidelity and topology of assets. That way you can get to close-up or medium shots like this. If you're getting some value out of this video so far and want me to keep making more topology related videos like this, make sure to subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and it will let me know when I started 3D modeling vehicles. And what could really help models like this is using reroute patterns in order to localize your density and basically route the areas that need more density, more topology, usually like curved surfaces, and basically have them stay away from areas that need to be a little bit lighter as far as optimization, especially areas that are flat, don't need that much topology because they really don't have that much curvature to define. So for example, if we go here, you'll see that he has a lot of topology just flowing here, and there's really no sense of control here as far as routing this topology. This is where reroute patterns are extremely powerful in routing your topology. And I'm gonna find a corner where I could demonstrate the power of the reroute patterns. One thing you'll notice is that he has way too much topology here, and a lot of these edges can be deleted. So what I want to do here in this corner is create a reroute pattern. A reroute pattern basically starts with a 5-star junction, and that 5-star dictates a change in direction. So what I'm going to do in Maya, I'm going to use the target weld tool. You could hit M in Blender and actually just do a merge as well. Just select your 2 verts and select which vert you actually want to merge them to. So I'm gonna go ahead and merge these 2 verts, and now we have a pole here, right? And then we also have this edge that's being collapsed. So we can double click this edge here, actually delete it. And now this, we could actually take the multi-cut tool, and in Blender it'd be the knife tool for equivalency, but we're just basically gonna create that cut. Now we can delete this edge. We're still quadded here, and we could actually go here and slide this edge over like so. But now we still have kind of this nice radial shape. We have this pole, and we were able to cut out that shape. So let me show you what a more cleaned up version of this vehicle would look like. And obviously for this model, I didn't have any reference, so I was just kind of guessing what areas I needed to uphold, what areas I didn't, but this should be pretty much what you need for the front of your vehicle. Something else that I did here is actually start off with a cylindrical cap, and I kind of attached it here. And now we're getting a much better profile here for the area where that wheel needs to be inset. So overall here, I was able to basically reduce pretty much every other edge, use these reroute patterns to really localize that density. So for vehicle modeling, having that localized density is key to getting a mesh that is pretty lightweight, yet still smooths out fine and looks great in subdivision mode. I'm going to quickly throw on one of the vehicles that I created, and you'll quickly see what I'm talking about on a completed model where you don't have a lot of density in simpler flat areas like the roof or even the hood of the car versus something a lot more detailed like the front of the car, that front bumper that houses the grille, the lights, and all these details that need to be carved into it. Next topology mistake on the list is modeling everything as one part. Bren right here created this buggy. Overall, he did a decent job. There's obviously areas he could improve upon, but I do want to focus on this part right here. You'll see see that he has a lot of topology pretty much having to flow from what looks like to be this cockpit here. This cockpit here is probably going to be a different material, and for animation purposes, it might have to be basically detached from this. One of the great things about detaching parts like this is that you don't have to flow all this geometry throughout the rest of your shapes. So if we go in here, he actually ran all the holding edges that he needed throughout this shape. You can actually see it here as well. And that's the beauty about separating your parts. So I went and remodeled this cockpit, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to jump over here and look at this version of the model that I made. And like I said, I only focused on one specific part. My aim wasn't to remodel every single part of each of these models. By separating this, I was able to basically reinforce these corners here without the need of having to pass all that geometry throughout the body here. So you see how much cleaner this looks versus what he previously had here going on. And that's a strategy that you could use from time to time, especially if your shapes are separate shapes. One caveat to this is while you're going through the modeling process, you don't want to break off pieces too early on in the modeling stage, because that can have discrepancies, especially in corner areas. For example, right here, you want to make sure that corner areas actually line up with the piece that you're detaching on. So breaking off your model into separate parts not only lets you animate certain parts differently, if that's what you need, but also you get to localize that geometry much more without having to pass all those holding edges throughout your mesh. The last topology mistake on the list is not enough divisions on curved surfaces. And this is by far one of the most common topology mistakes that are out there. If you've been 3D modeling for any bit of time, especially with sub-D modeling, you'll know that curved surfaces are a lot trickier to actually pull off without pinching or mesh errors versus their flat counterparts. Topology issues on curved surfaces is actually so common that I decided to display 3 different examples from different students that actually display a different flavor of the same problem. The next model up here is by the one and only Helen. She joined 3D Beast Academy at 70 years young and has been crushing it since. She's really been able to create complex hard surface models with relatively clean topology. So we'll see here that she really doesn't have much noticeable pinching. She was able to handle overall these complex shapes very, very well. But the area that I want to focus on here is this curved surface. And this is why she ended up on my video. But honestly, this is a mistake that I made with my topology, even when I was pretty good at hard surface modeling, is not having enough divisions on certain curved areas to support the holding edges and the details coming from those areas. And I'm going to say it again, details dictate density. If we go in here, we'll clearly see the pinching topology here starts collapsing. That's because we have a much denser area here converging onto a curved surface that doesn't have that much density. So a lot of people, me included when I first began, we get stuck on topology patterns, right? And we think about just having things as quads, and quads will fix the mistake. But that's not always the case, right? We have to break that cycle or that mentality of always thinking in topology patterns. And what is this topology actually doing? What are the needs of this topology, and how is one level of density flowing onto the other? So here, we obviously know that we need at least 3 edges in this area to support this detail. However, on a perfectly curved surface with not a lot of density, what's happening is if we go to 3 mode, you see that everything's pretty much expanding, and we don't have that matching density on this curved surface to properly hold this up. So it's starting to collapse onto itself. So now I'm going to jump to the part that I remodeled for, and you see that this is a lot cleaner. You see how all these details and even all these corners are actually held up fine. The funny thing about this is that I actually kept the same exact pattern that she had. So if we go back here, you'll notice that she had this diamond pattern here, and I also have a small diamond pattern. But the only difference is that I have much more initial denser geometry on that cylindrical part to actually support those details. And we really don't get a lot of pinching. Something else that I did on this part is I started to use diamond patterns here to reduce the topology on the flat areas. Obviously, I left it here by itself, but you can't always reduce on the flat areas. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, JL, why don't I just actually add density in the areas that I need while keeping these areas relatively light? The best example that I can show you is this mashed up cylinder. So I basically created one initial cylinder with 16 sides. I cut out essentially 4 slices of that pie, and then I used another much denser cylinder of 32, and I actually stuck those slices in there. So basically this is comprised of 2 perfect cylinders. However, this slice is double the density here. Now, if we jump here to the top view and we go into sub-D mode, we see that this cylindrical shape is lopsided. So if you need a perfect cylindrical shape, this is not an ideal method, even though in a way it does make sense. The problem with this solution, since this is much less dense, there is some shrinkage going on that this side doesn't have as it is more dense. So if you actually look at it, it does look pretty lopsided. And this is something that you have to keep in account when creating perfect cylindrical areas like wheels, or in this example, this curved surface. But overall, I'm super proud of this model and Helen's work ethic to really create these complex hard surface models with pretty clean topology. So this model is by my man Deacon. He did an amazing job overall. Really not a lot of pinching, nothing major that really sticks out. There are just a couple of issues of just kind of continuing some of the edge flow. What I want to focus on is this curved surface here. Something you'll note here is if we disable the wireframe, even at a subdivision level of 2, so if I jump in here and we look at our mesh, we see that we're sitting at a subdivision level of 2. This is a pretty big radius for this shape. So if we take off the wireframe, you can see that we get noticeable faceting here on this shape, even at a relative medium distance. This is because this is a large radius on this shape. And look at this smoothness here, which obviously we have faceting, versus this right here. So that initial density of those cylinders, you really got to think about a little bit more, especially when you're having larger shapes. So all things being equal, this, which looks like it only has 8 divisions for such a large radius, should be a lot more than something equivalent. If we look at this curvature, this was a perfect cylinder. This also has 8 all the way around. So what this is going to cause us to do is having to bump up our subdivisions quite a bit more just to get the right smoothness for just this shape. So we'd probably have to go to a level 3. Now, if we subdivide this looks nice and smooth. Keep in mind that bumping up your subdivisions just to get a little bit of a smoother shape in one area is a bit overkill. And for larger, more complex scenes, this will start to bog your scene down. So the better approach would be just to actually use a cylinder here that's a little bit more subdivided. Now, if we go into 3 mode and we stick to a subdivision level 2, you see that actually holds up pretty well, and there's no need to go to a 3. So right here, we're looking at a 2, and now we need to be at a 3 to get the same smoothness here. So this is definitely a much more optimized mesh. And even when you're doing sub-D modeling, you still want to think about your mesh optimization. And last but not least, we have Nick, who provided this nice looking coffee machine here. And he did a great job in capturing the shape. However, Nick was having the issue of that he learned a primarily Boolean's workflow without really just understanding or having the knowledge of how to properly clean that topology and execute surfaces that are going to look good in subdivision or using this subdivision modifier. And overall for this model, since he has a pretty clean shape, even though a lot of these shapes are not quadded, all we would have to do is go in with a knife tool or even just start connecting these vertices to start quadding some of this out. This would be a much cleaner subdivision surface. Again, I do want to focus on just one part of this, and I'll focus on this area here. If you see my brain starting to smoke, it's just having to go from Maya navigation to Blender navigation. So I'm going to go to edit mode here and just disable the subsurf modifier, take off the overlay here, which is going to disable my wireframe. You'll see that he's having a lot of shading issues. So let me go in here and hide this shape. Now with this part hidden, we'll see the root of the issues that Nick was having. Again, details dictate density. So if we go in here and we actually look at one of these other parts, you'll see that all these actually go into subdivision mode fine. And you see for these simpler shapes here, if I go and actually bump up the divisions and disable the wireframes, see that we have a really smooth result. However, it looks like he tried to take this same density here and apply it to this shape, which has a lot more details coming out of it. And this is why I always say details dictate density. So going back to the knob here, this is pretty much the version without the bevel modifier. And this is pretty much my result. One I decided to use creased edges, and one I decided to use regular holding edges. But if we take this overlay off, you see that we get the same exact result. Now, how I was able to get this much cleaner result really stemmed from me starting with a much more subdivided surface to be able to support these details. So I actually went with about double the density of that initial topology that Nick actually had. So you'll see that by me using a lot more density here, I was able to have enough topology that I could route these edges, all this detail, without really having a lot of pinching. And this is the proper amount of subdivisions on the cylindrical surface to actually have a nice smooth result, even when using sub-D mode. Nick, this is a fantastic start. This is a fantastic shape, but having that little bit of extra topology knowledge is going to really push you to a pro level. Even though you are using Blender and taking my hard surface modeling course, I definitely already see the progress. So I think you're in the right route, Nick, and I'm super proud of the work that you've been doing so far. I hope this video cleared up some of the common topology mistakes for you, but learning doesn't have to stop here. If you're serious about moving from a hobbyist to a 3D pro and creating production quality 3D models, having spot-on topology is key. It's a must if you aim to break into commercials or the VFX industry. And for that, I made this video right here. It builds on what you just learned here, and I packed it with my top secrets based on my very own 3D models. So don't miss out. Jump into the next level of learning now. Until we meet again, folks, I will catch you next time. In this Maya hard surface modeling tutorial, I'm going to show you a killer strategy on getting details easily on curved surfaces without any pinching. If you've been around the block with hard surface modeling within Maya, you know that pinching on curved surfaces is a very common problem. I'll be showing you a killer strategy on how to start your project by modeling all the details on a simple plane, and then towards the end of the video, I'll be showing you a little known Maya deformer to actually give it its final shape. All that plus some bonus tips in the video coming up. In this Maya hard surface modeling tutorial, I'm going to show you a killer strategy on getting details easily on curved surfaces without any pinching. If you've been around the block with hard surface modeling within Maya, you know that pinching on curved surfaces is a very common problem. I'll be showing you a killer strategy on how to start your project by modeling all the details on a simple plane, and then towards the end of the video, I'll be showing you a little known Maya deformer to actually give it its final shape. All that plus some bonus tips in the video coming up. What's going on, you 3D modeling beasts? This is JMUC, and welcome to another Maya hard surface modeling tutorial. So my man Backheat, hopefully I'm saying his name right, was struggling getting details on a curved surface, and I think we all have been there, where we actually go in there and not really have the right edge flow or the right number of divisions going into that, can really just make modeling details on a curved surface somewhat of a nightmare. So I told my man, don't even worry about it, I got your back, and I'm gonna help you out, and we're gonna knock out this mouse, and I'm gonna show you and you guys at home how to actually create really any detail on a curved surface with this killer strategy. Before we get started, make sure to smash the like button. It really helps the channel out. I have great news about my Maya hard surface modeling course. I'm currently offering a free trial. So if you're interested in that, I'm gonna go ahead and drop the link down below. That way you can check out the course absolutely for free. And if you haven't done so already, make sure that you join our Facebook community, our 3D modeling beast group. This is a place where I actually take a lot of these requests or a lot of these videos that you are seeing. That's where I get the ideas from, is from members that actually share their posts within the group. So without further ado, let's get started. One side note is most of my tools are hotkeyed, so I will call them out. If you don't know how to get to that tool, I will have a call out card at the bottom of the video. That way you could access that tool via the menus if you never have. So right here, I have my image plane set up. First thing that I'll do with image planes, what I like doing is bringing up the channel box here and throwing it into a different layer, and then just set it to a reference. That way I cannot select it on the viewport, but I can select it here via the outliner right here. All right, so that's a nifty little feature. One thing you'll note is that I'm going to start here with this lower res plane, and to actually get all this detail that I need on a curved surface, I will need to actually have something that's pretty much this density. What I'm actually going to do though is worry about shaping pretty much this perimeter. I'll probably do something in symmetry, mirror it over, and then take care of the asymmetry right here. But I'm not going to concentrate too much on the shape. The main point of this tutorial is going to be how to carve in kind of this pattern here. Once I establish this shape on this lower res, I will apply a smooth, and we'll get a resolution like this, which is going to be better suited to reduce pinching on a curved surface. So I'm going to start with a multi-cut. So I'm going to take that right about here, and I'm going to use this line here, somewhat of a symmetry line. So before I do anything, I'm going to just select that edge that I just pretty much carved. I'll go ahead and detach these components. And anytime that you're detaching, in order to delete, you want to make sure that the cut is all the way through. I have border edges turned on in the preferences. Right now, I pretty much cut out this island here. One thing you'll note is if you double click, basically there's a leak somewhere in that cut. So what you can do, sometimes this can be frustrating, especially if visually we see that border edge, right? And we kind of missed it there, so I know what it is. But let's just say you were here. What you could do to test that. that leak pretty much in that cut is you can start growing your selection, and you'll see pretty much right here is the leak, right? So if you didn't know, if you're ever trying to basically figure out what's not cut all the way through, you could always do a grow selection, and that'll kind of expose the area. So I know the leak is happening right here, so what I can do is just kind of delete that area, and now I can just double click here and delete this. So I'll quickly shape this, and I'm just going to collapse some of these verts by merging them down like so. So any of these right here that are pretty close together, I just start cleaning some of this up right away. But I'm not overly concerned about perfect edge flow at this point. I'm just trying to establish this shape. What I'm going to do is start pretty much rounding this off like this, and I'm going to take it this way like so, and now I can go ahead and meet up with this guy right here.
Since I made my last video about topology tips in Blender, I've had a bunch of requests to make some sort of follow-up, and I did promise a few months back that this would be a series. So luckily I have quite a lot of these tips up my sleeve, so let's take a look at some of the methods professionals use to handle their topology when 3D modeling. So at the end of my last topology video, I showed off a method to create a cylinder that has all quads and no n-gons on the cap. A lot of people said they found that really useful, and there's actually a few methods of doing this with various strengths and weaknesses, so I thought I would show off a few of the methods that I commonly use. So the first method is essentially the same as the one I demoed in the last video. You just delete the top of a cylinder, and then you select the top edge loop. You press E to extrude and S to scale it in a little bit, and I tend to find that you get slightly better distribution of faces if you enable symbol blending. In object mode, if I press Ctrl and a number like 4, that'll add a subdivision surface modifier, and I can add some support loops, and as you can see we get some nice shading and good quad topology. We can also easily change how sharp the edge of the cylinder is just by grabbing these edge loops and double tapping G and then sliding them closer or further away from the edge. The next method requires you to have a cylinder that has a triangle fan. There is an option for that when you make the cylinder, or if you've already got the cylinder in the scene, you can select the top, inset a little bit, press M and...
Hey everyone, today we're going to cover 5 tips for better understanding topology in any 3D software. I'll be using Maya for this demo, but the concepts and workflows discussed here can be applied to any 3D software. I've narrowed down these tips after many years of professionally modeling and teaching students over the years to improve their understanding of topology. If you found these tips helpful, have any of your own tips that could help people, or want me to cover topology in greater detail, let me know down in the comments below. As always, a like and subscribe is always appreciated as I continue to grow the content of this channel. So with that, let's get started. Alright, so here we are in Maya, and I'm going to start with the very first tip. And the first tip is localizing topology. And what I mean by localizing topology is having the ability to add topology within your model without spreading topology and edge flow in areas that you don't want. For example, if I go ahead and take a look at this hammer boy that I modeled in a previous tutorial, and I want to add geometry here for the hands, the last thing that I'd want to do is to jump over to multi-cut and just add in edge loops here that are now going to run the length of the model, right? And you can see how this gives me unintended edges that run all the way around the model. I definitely don't want that. So what I want to do is, let me undo that, jump back to this plane here, and I can show you kind of in a simpler point of view. You can see that I have one face here that's being cut and split into 2 faces, and then it's then being split into even more faces here. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we started with 1, and now we have 4. You can see that I can combine that with different techniques here, where I start with 1 face, end up with 2, and then split that to have 4 here, and then now I can even get almost 6 faces here, right? And so this is just allowing me to add topology strategically, right, and localizing it in areas that I only need it. Now, how would I do this? If I go ahead and create a cube here, we can go ahead and take a look. So I'll go ahead and scale this cube up and zoom in, and we'll go ahead and just do a Control E for extrude, and then do an offset, bring this in, and then hit G to repeat last, and then extrude that out. Now, again, if I wanted to now extrude some fingers on here, and I go ahead and do the multi-cut, we can see what happens if I just start adding in a bunch of edges that are now routing throughout the rest of the model. So instead what I can do is I'll Control middle click, add that in the middle, and Control middle click again. Now, one thing that you can do, there's a couple ways of doing this. You can add Control middle click a few times here, like so, or I'll just go ahead and left click a couple of times. Now what we can do here is I can go ahead now and move these faces. And I can do that by entering the multi-cut tool. So if I grab the multi-cut tool, I can start at one corner and cut about in the middle, and then start at the other corner and cut at the middle here, like so. Then I have this. Now, of course, I'd want to just kind of meet these or connect these two. Then I want to remove these edges here, like so. Now we have these, or this face loop running around, and that allows me to be able to go through and delete these edges. Now I want to make sure to do the same thing on the bottom, but for right now, I'm simply just going to delete these faces so it doesn't loop all the way around for the simplicity of this demonstration. So I'll go ahead and select these edges and then remove. And then now you can see that I have these faces here, without adding all that extra geometry in on the rest of the mesh. And you can combine that with techniques again. If I go ahead and just kind of shift move this to extrude, and if you wanted to even add even more, you could grab your multi-cut tool again, and I can middle mouse cut that, and then you can do something like this where we call these I call these kind of kites or diamonds, like so. And now I can go ahead and start to add in more geometry or edges here, right? So like so. Now what this is going to do is allow me to have a bunch of edges or a bunch of faces here without, again, taking it throughout the rest of the mesh. And then now, even though you can see that I have these triangles here, I can simply remove this middle triangle here and create the kite shape that I was talking about. And then now I go ahead and just kind of move that, and then there we go. And again, you'll see this being used all over the place. I use these all the time for hands. So you can see that I have this kite shape here that's just allowing me to add in some extra geometry for the fingers without having to go through and add it throughout the rest of the glove or the rest of the model. You'll see me use that here as well on the back of the model, where I start to use this inner part, this face loop, to be able to add in some more geometry. And again, kind of the last thing here is, if I go here now, you can go ahead and move this edge, like so. And you can kind of just manually do it where I multi-cut this, and go ahead and multi-cut and kind of add in a point here. That real quick. And you can just manually cut in to get these loops too. So that's another way of kind of doing the same thing. So I do this all the time, like so, and then I can terminate it at this edge. And again, you get this nice face loop running all the way around. So being able to understand this, how to kind of start with one and split your edges and get more, or split your faces and get more edges to add that topology. This is what I mean by localizing topology. So using this technique is something that I use all the time. Using these kite quads is something that I use all over my models. The next tip is how to clean up n-gons and triangles. A lot of times you'll be splitting and cutting faces and cutting some edges, and you'll get to a point where you're kind of running along and you have to diagonally cut across, and then you're left with a triangle and an n-gon. So I get an n-gon, which is a 5-sided face. Now, we want to make sure, at least for organic modeling and most of hard surface modeling, we want to typically end up with what's called just quads, or 4-sided polygons. You see that I have this, which is pretty complex, but all of these complex cuts and edges here are quads, and they're 4-sided, all right? So when we get to this instance, when we're cutting across edges and faces, we can simply use this technique where we split this in half. And what I mean by that is, if I go ahead and jump into the multi-cut tool, I can just click on the middle part of the edge here and take it and terminate at the corner of that face, which gives me now this. I know this might seem very simple, but I'm telling you, when you're going through and modeling and cutting and splitting, now you've just created this nice clean face loop that's running all over the model, which is exactly what you want. And it avoids a triangle and n-gon, which both of those combined is going to give a lot of smoothing artifacts. So by smoothing, I mean by holding shift right click and going to mesh smooth, or smooth. And so you can see you get these nice even quads. Without that, before, if I go ahead and actually just delete this and go to the object mode and go ahead and smooth, you'll see it's going to try to do its best here, but it's giving us a little bit more uneven of a subdivision. Now, so it's always going to subdivide its best to try to end up with quads, but if the subdivision algorithm has to account for a lot of triangles in that topology, actually just delete this. And then I can do a Control E for extrude. Easily fix that. We can go ahead and just split this, having edges like this that are already on existing edges and working with that. Well, if I wanted to do something more organic, I certainly can. So I'll go ahead and grab my multi-cut tool and just start cutting. And then now I can start cutting across edges like so. And you get something like this. Now again, you're going to be left with these triangles and n-gons like so. So in order to easily fix that, we can go ahead and just split this in half and split this top one in half like so. And there you go. We can kind of Control Shift slide on the edge, and then what we can get is selecting this edge. Now obviously I'm not going to worry about where this ends up, but this is fine. And then I can hold Shift right click and do a bevel edge. So you get something like this. Now of course we see how this ends up. You can easily fix that by going into multi-cut and using that technique that I showed on tip 1. So now if I go ahead and just kind of cut this across like so, and then I cut it and meet it at these corners here, there you go. You get these nice quads here, which is exactly what we want. And then you can terminate it here like so. And this is just one way to do it, right? So here's just another way of cutting it, which is just a few more clicks, but it's all the same at the end of the day. Okay, and then we get this nice face loop here that's running all the way across our model. So I can click here and grab these. And then I can do a Control E for extrude and move these in. And G again, just give myself a little bit of a holding line. And I'm just showing an example of how to just kind of cut in on an organic surface, and there you go. So now you can see that cut in pretty well, and I'm able to add in these nice corners and clean those up and still maintain quads by splitting that quad, that triangle. triangle, and that end gone. All right. The next tip I'm going to recommend is edge flow and keeping an even distribution of edges. If we take a look at the model here, as an example, you can see that this character model that I've created has a nice, clean, even distribution of edges, and that every edge that's in here is helping the form. Okay. And what do I mean by that? If I actually go and select this mesh and apply or hold right click, just simple right click, don't hold shift or anything, and assign a new material, I'm going to assign what's called a surface shader. Now, I like to use my surface shaders because it just lets me know where my edges are being most impactful and if I have any dead edges, and it just allows you to look at the silhouette of the model and focus on the form. If you notice, you have what's called dead edges. So for example, if I take this and delete these, you can see now I just have straight edges here. And then if I multi-cut and maybe add in a couple of cuts, now look at the difference, right? Look at the difference between this, which is super flat, which is again, kind of those dead edges that I was talking about, right? So if we go ahead and maybe duplicate this and move this up like so, and I'll remove these edges. And you have to be careful, right? Because sometimes you're just going in and cutting and adding things, but not adding to the form. That's where you run into issues like this, all right? And then I can do assign a new material and assign the surface shader, right? And you can see that here I'm getting more form out of my edges here versus here, which is a complete straight line. It's very subtle, but these are the things that I'm looking for as I'm going through and working on my models, right? And so you can see if I do the same thing here, our arms now are super straight, right? And very tubular, all right? So you definitely want to keep that in mind, an even distribution of edges and adding edges as you go, right? So I can take a look now and kind of see, you know, this here with this tip, right? So now I have the next tip, which is going to be holding edges and face loops. So edge flow here, you can see is really important, and especially when it comes to holding the form. You can see I have this fairly organic looking axe shape, and I have, just like the last tip, a good, you know, even distribution. So that's being applied here as well. And then I'm having these holding lines that's being applied to my models. A lot of times I'll see people, you know, students want to create models, and they won't add in these edges to hold form. So you always want to make sure to add in those good holding lines on your models. In the simplest form, I can go ahead and create a cylinder here and bring this over. And if we take a look at this, and I can give this, you know, maybe 32 or maybe even 16, right? So we can see it kind of working more impactfully. So if I have something like this, and just right off the bat, if I go ahead and hit 3 for smooth preview, I've lost that form, right? So that's where your edge flow and holding lines are going to come into play. So if I go now into here, you know, and grab my multi-cut tool, I can add a multi-cut here at the top and then here at the bottom. But then watch what happens. It's starting to get better, right? But I still need a little bit more. So if I'll apply Fong here, you can see how kind of soft that's looking, right? So imagine if this was an arm or a piece on a hard surface model, we need more geometry. I always tell students, don't rely on smooth preview for your form. So meaning you need to add in geometry, and the mesh smooth that happens at the end, this really should just be kind of like if you were applying this this soften edge at the end. That's how you want to look at it. You don't want to rely on it for your form. So you can see we still need a little bit more here for the subdivision. So what I'll do now is go into face mode, select these faces here at the top and the bottom, and then I'll extrude these faces. and then I'll do an offset. So now I got these. So this is getting better. So I'm holding the form from the top and the bottom. But then I also need, now look what happened to these edges. They're coming closer together. So I'm going to need even more edges here in the middle for this to better subdivide. So now if I go ahead and just control middle click about 2 to 3 times, I'll do it 3 times. Now look at this. You can see how much better this looks. And if I go ahead and duplicate and move this, this is the sub D model, or the subdivided one, the smooth preview. This one now is going to be the softened edge, right? So you can see that now they're much similar here in overall form versus having something where we originally started, which was, not having these holding lines and the holding edges. Now this is, again, in its simplest form, how I would apply this to a cylinder, right? So the same can be applied to more complex models here. So definitely looking for these face loops here for holding the form. We have our holding lines here, and then you'll see the kites and everything coming in. I did want to add in, I left this triangle here so you can get an understanding of sometimes having triangles are completely okay, especially with hard surface and flat objects. So don't worry and don't try to kill yourself to try to get all even quads. Sometimes a simple triangle will keep things just cleaner, even without having to cut in and add more geometry. All right. And so you can see another example here, where if I turn on edge faces here, you can see that I'm using these kite quads all over the model here. This is kind of on a character that I modeled not too long ago. And then we can see that we have these face loops here, these holding lines, that's just holding the overall form, right? Because without that, that's not going to hold the form as well, right? These are the subtle differences between, having and not having these things. So you can see how the difference in the spread here when it comes to sub D modeling and topology. And if I re-add that, you can see now it really keeps this edge tighter here. All right, and I was actually in the middle of this one, so this one needs a little bit more holding lines, but I left it like this so you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about here. All right, and then you can see more examples of how I use kite quads, especially when you're working with larger faces that have to come down to really, really thin faces here. So this is a Recaro C, a racing seat that I modeled for a vehicle, and you can see exactly that technique and that edge flow being put into practice here. All right, so these are the 4, and the last one, the 5th technique, is going to help you improve topology almost immediately, and it's going to be practice. Practice topology. But what I mean by that is, focus on just retopologizing. All right. So what I mean is, take a look at. I just pulled this model, this head sculpt from ZBrush, and I just decimated it down and I brought it into Maya. Find some models that you've done in the past, okay? And if you're struggling learning topology and edge flow, work and use the tool called Quad Draw. So what I'm going to do now is select this model, go ahead and turn it into a live surface. And then I'm going to use Quad Draw. Now what Quad Draw is going to do is allow me to start plotting points. So I can left click here 4 times, shift click, and boom, I've created a quad. So you're drawing quads on this surface. Then I can just continue to do this and then add 2. And in order to get the face, you plot the points, hold shift and left click. Then you can also hold control, left click to add, or hold tab to pull out some edges. Now you can use tab and middle mouse to face loop. Localizing topology, having the ability to go up and
of a bulging effect on the side. And that's okay if you have things that are like soft plastics or rubbery in nature. Sometimes that actually looks good. Or if you're trying to do stylized assets, maybe for film or whatever, you can get away with those chamfer